Today at the National Press Club, ACTU President Michele O'Neill and Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry Chief Executive Andrew McKellar. The pair will debate industrial relations policy as part of the club's pre-election series. Michele O'Neill and Andrew McKellar with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to today's Westpac National Press Club address, coming to you from the nation's capital. We're on Ngunnawal country. I'm Greg Jennett, Director at the club, and we are organising a series of debates throughout the duration of the forthcoming federal election campaign. It hasn't quite started, but today is the first in a series, and we're focusing today on industrial relations. So the Albanese government was quick out of the blocks with its Jobs and Skills Summit soon after forming government. But there, I think it's fair to say, haven't been a huge number of new ideas after it delivered on the first tranche of outcomes that came from those discussions in the front half of its term. So we'll see if there are new ideas out there today. Perhaps the campaign proper could also generate some. We hope to play our part. Whatever, we can be certain that our two guests today will be protagonists, or is that antagonists, I'm not sure, agitating for change on behalf of workers and employers. We have Michele O'Neill with us. Welcome, Michele, the ACTU President since 2018, and Andrew McKellar. Welcome to you too, Andrew, Chief Executive of the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We'll get all of our guests here in the club to duly give them a warm welcome. Now, there are rules, inverted commas, that both Michele and Andrew are familiar with. We won't run through them for you now. But be assured also, I won't be asking all the questions. We do have working journalists here to pose theirs. We will try and make it as free-flowing as possible. Among the rules, we've had a coin toss prior to the debate commencing to decide who would deliver the opening statement first, and Michele won that. So, Michele O'Neill, take it away with your opening statement, please.
Thanks, Greg. I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands we're on today, the Ngunnawal people. Pay all my respects to the elders past and present. It always was and it always will be Aboriginal land. And thank you to the National Press Club for inviting us to this debate. And I want to use this short time before Andrew and I are at your mercy to talk about what will be a key issue in a cost of living election: wages. Many factors influence whether working people get fair wage increases. History tells us it's driven by workers and unions exercising collective power. The relative bargaining power of workers and employers is undoubtedly a big driver. The policies set by government that affect this power balance make a big difference. Real wages stagnated and then went backwards under the 9 years of the coalition government. And this was a deliberate design feature of their economic policy, as famously explained by previous Finance Minister Matthias Cormann. And the facts tell us that the coalition government, including Cabinet Minister Peter Dutton, kept to their word. If anyone had any doubt that what governments do affect pay rises, just let's look at the turnaround in all the key labour market statistics over the last 3 years. Real wages have grown more in the last 12 months than under the entire 9 years of the coalition government. Excluding a short period during the pandemic, wages' share of GDP is increasing, and it's the highest it's been since 2016. The gender pay gap reached its lowest level ever and is closing at 3 times the rate it was closing at under the coalition government. The number of permanent jobs has lifted by 860,000 over the last 3 years. This is good news. However, real wages need to continue to rise, more repairs needed, but the signs are heading in the right direction, especially as the full positive impact of industrial relations reforms is yet to be felt. Governments can ensure a fair wages system or an unfair one. Real wages can grow by design, just as low wage growth can be by design. Those are the statistics, but then there are real people behind them. like the workers who've joined me today. Nurses Janine and Connor, cleaners Helen and Michele, retail, transport workers, teachers, flight attendants, public and community sector workers. Thanks for coming. But some things are predictable. Whether times are tough or times are good, business lobby groups oppose workers having more rights and wages going up. They have some common talking points. Let me list the major claims of the employer groups about the economic impact of the industrial relations changes the Albanese government made. Claim 1, these reforms will lead to job destruction. Yet here we are, close to full employment with record growth in permanent jobs. Claim 2, these reforms will cause a wage price spiral, worsening inflation. Nothing of the sort happened. Wages have moderated in line with inflation, which is now below the middle of the RBA's target band. Claim 3, these reforms will cause business investment to flee. Private business investment has grown by 10% since the first major IR changes became law. Claim 4, these reforms will crash the economy. Last quarter, GDP growth was 0.6% and we are out of a per capita recession. Have you noticed a theme? The level of public debate on industrial relations from the employer side in this country is usually dismal. Getting real wages growing again has been the biggest impact on every working person's ability to keep up and get ahead. It's something governments have a big say over. So let me unpack some of the other policies that have enabled this. The current government supported increases to minimum and award wages for the last 3 years, which have seen some of the biggest increases on record. This directly helps nearly 3 million workers and it lifts the floor for everybody. Collective bargaining is up by more than 20% and delivering pay rises for workers who've never had access to them before because of the repair to the bargaining system. The government's cracked down on wage theft with stronger penalties and shut down wage-cutting schemes employed by big business. The right to disconnect laws have further cut the levels of unpaid overtime. Gig workers have access to basic rights as workers that they've never had before. The government funded pay rises for aged care and early childhood education and care workers who have long been undervalued. Yes. The coalition voted against every single one of these IR changes. ACCI and other employer lobby groups opposed every single one as well. We don't have an IR policy from Peter Dutton. We've been told there is one. Where is it? They're on the record committing to abolish rights for casuals, the right to disconnect and to bring back big business wage-cutting schemes. This means supporting big business rorts to cut wages by removing same job, same pay. Abolishing the right to disconnect will send a message to Australian employers that workers will again be at their beck and call 24/7 for free work. Changing the definition of casual so that regardless of the reality of your working arrangements, if the boss calls you a casual, you are a casual without paid leave or job security, all of which damage wage growth. But no IR policy. The supermarkets and now the banks and employer lobby groups are trying to cut penalty rates for retail, bank and admin workers. I can tell you today, that will cost the average person over $5,000 per year. If they succeed, it will see these workers lose $1.7 billion in wages. We know where Labor stands. Where does Peter Dutton stand? We have wish lists from ACCI and other employer groups, but silence from Michele. What commitments has she given them? The Australian people deserve to know. Let's be clear, what is at risk is wage growth, pay rises for 12 million working Australians and the people who depend on them. This election, it's wages that are at risk.
Michele O'Neill, thank you. I did say at the outset there's a little fluidity here to our rules, and with that I'll invite you, Andrew McKellar, to go for an opening statement of roughly the same duration as Michele. She went a bit over 6 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you, Greg. Thank you to Michele, and I join Michele acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands here in this region, the Ngunnawal people. Thank you everyone, of course, for joining us today for this discussion, for this debate. Very important topics that I think we're covering. To start with, I should say that the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, ACCI, is the largest and most representative business organisation in Australia. We speak for businesses of all sizes across every sector and in every region of Australia. Our mission is clear. It's to make Australia the best place in the world to do business. And today, I want to outline a positive vision for our economy, one that builds on the strength of our businesses, not to burden them with more red tape and restrictions. Our vision for Australian workplaces is built on a simple but powerful principle. Flexibility and a focus on productivity leads to better outcomes for both employers and for employees. Our workplace relations system should encourage enterprise, not hinder it. That means, firstly, simplifying small business regulation. We have proposed that the definition of small business in the Fair Work Act should be increased from its current level of less than 15 employees up to 25 employees. That would free many small businesses from excessive red tape and allow them to grow and create jobs. We want to promote enterprise bargaining. Productivity gains come from negotiations at the enterprise level where businesses and employees understand their own needs best. Multi-employer bargaining should be voluntary. It should never be imposed. Integrity and the rule of law. Recently, we've seen some alarming examples of intimidation and flagrant disregard for the rule of law in key industries. Such breaches cannot be tolerated and must be comprehensively addressed if we are to restore public confidence. Effective workplace relations are a critical part of our strategy, but it's only one piece of a much larger picture. To achieve economic prosperity, we need a broader strategy that drives productivity and strengthens our global competitiveness. Our broader vision for improving Australia's future focuses on several critical issues. Boosting productivity and growth. We need policies that encourage investment, modernise our tax system and reduce the cost of doing business. A competitive company tax rate, a lean regulatory environment and a focus on business innovation are key to achieving this. Developing skills and workforce capability. A strong economy requires a skilled workforce. We must invest in education and training and ensure practical access to skilled migration where necessary. Strengthening open and competitive markets. Australia thrives when we engage with the world. Open trade and investment drive economic opportunity and support Australian businesses to be internationally competitive. Ensuring affordable, reliable energy. The transition to net zero must be economically sustainable. Market-based solutions, not over-regulation, will deliver the energy security and the affordability that businesses and households rely upon. Now, before I finish, I want to remind people today that ACCI is strictly apolitical. We are non-partisan. We are not a proxy for any political party or interest, and that's the reality. In the Australian economy today, we have much to be proud of, but we also see urgent challenges which must be addressed if we are to achieve our competitive potential and keep the economy operating at or near full employment. The industrial relation changes of the past couple of years have added hundreds of pages of complex new legislation, making it harder, not easier, to run a business in this country. Our recent business surveys revealed some deeply concerning trends. 82% of small businesses considered that the growing burden of compliance was a significant issue for them. 45% of small businesses said they had considered closing their doors over the past 12 months. And alarmingly, 34% of small business owners revealed that they have a diagnosed mental health issue, a big jump from 22% 2 years prior. Earlier this year, as ACCI prepared to launch our pre-election strategy, Agenda for Business, we could see these statistics reflected in the stories of small business owners and operators that we talked to. But we could also see how these businesses are the lifeblood of their communities. We heard DJ in Wagga Wagga describe how proud she was to serve a wide range of Australian wines and beers at her shop, Bidgie and Vine. Paul from Kempsey shared with our team that despite heading well into retirement age, he was motivated to keep his furniture store operating to provide decent jobs for his team and to contribute to the local community. Whatever happens in the coming weeks, once we get past the forthcoming federal election, we say the next government must adopt an ambitious agenda. A renewed commitment to fiscal discipline. Open the door to meaningful tax reform for the first time in a quarter of a century. Refocus workplace relations on productivity and agreement making at the enterprise level. Seek to forge a new bipartisan consensus on affordable, reliable and sustainable energy solutions. And above all, ensure a fair deal for the small businesses that are at the heart of our economy. The right policy choices from the next government will help to grow the size of the pie rather than simply redistributing the share of the pie, ensuring that all Australians benefit from a more prosperous future. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you. Why don't we start out on a key point you raised right at the outset, Michele O'Neill, about wages growth, or more particularly real wages growth. After the government embarked on its IR reforms, it made no bones of the fact that the objective was to get wages moving again. We have more recently, in the December quarter wage price index figures, started to see it come down a little, 3.2%, the annual rate, which I guess to some observers would say it's settling into an acceptable and sustainable band, roughly in line with inflation, ever so slightly above perhaps. Yet you have said more real wages growth is needed. How much more above the figures we're seeing now? And why is that sustainable?
Thanks, Greg. Well, the reason we say that is because workers haven't caught up. We had 9 years under the previous coalition government of wages being stagnant or going backwards in real terms. So what has been a period now of real wage growth has started to repair what's happened to those workers and their families and their capacity to do what they need to do to get ahead. But there needs to be more repair work. And some of the things that have come in have only really just started to have effect. So they need to have more time to make sure that we see those improvements continue. Our view is that wages need to be real wage growth, so we need to keep in front of inflation. It's good to see that inflation has come down, but the repair work, there's still more work to do.
How long do you think that repair period would take? Are we talking 1 to 2 years? Surely not the 9 years you highlighted in your address.
Well, you would hope that it doesn't take workers and their family that long to recover to what they lost under the previous government. You would hope that we see sustainable real wage growth that really does make a difference to people. But it's impossible to say how long that period's going to be for.
All right, Andrew, you do have a right to pick up on this point around
Sure.
sustainability and optimal real growth rates.
Well, I think the first point I would make, Greg, is to challenge the assertion about the performance of what's happened with real wages in recent quarters, in the recent period. I mean, even if you just take a narrow measure like the wage price indicator against inflation, we're talking about a very nominal increase, about 0.8%. I challenge anybody in this room to describe to me the impact that has on their standard of living. But I also think it's important to look at the broader measure. So if you go back to the national accounts and you look at what's been happening in terms of GDP per capita, then in fact, up until the most recent quarter, the December quarter data, we had 7 successive quarters of negative GDP per capita growth. And I think that better reflects what's happening to Australian living standards in the current economic environment. So, yes, inflation is coming down. That's a good thing. Wages are not breaking out. That's fine. But the fundamental thing here, and I think the thing to understand, the point I would seek to impress today, is if you don't have a strategy for productivity, then you don't have a strategy for real wages. It can only be through productivity that sustainable real wages growth is going to be achieved.
We might come back to some ideas on productivity growth. You do acknowledge there, Andrew McKellar, that there has not been a wage price spiral breakout so far, and yet you are calling for, and have in the past called for, a number of Albanese government initiatives to be unwound. Multi-employer bargaining, you want voluntary, and you've also had a lot to say, I think, about the definition of casual workers. What evidence do you have that either of those initiatives are contributing to overinflated wage growth?
Well, I think the bigger issue here, Greg, is the impact of compliance and regulation, the burden that's imposing across the spectrum for business and in particular for small businesses. So there's 2.5 million small businesses operating in Australia. Around 97-98% of all businesses in the country are small businesses. They are the lifeblood of our economy, yet at the moment they are being strangled. And if you go and ask them at the moment what the experience is, and I had some of the figures in my opening comments, 82% of small businesses identify that regulation, compliance burden is an issue for them. 61% would say that's gone up in the past 1 to 2 years significantly. If you ask them which things have gone up, of course, tax is always a burden. That hasn't changed. The area that's grown the most is labour regulation. If you want to take on a casual employee, it's not now, here's a contract, let's sign the contract, let's get on with work. There's a multi-page set of criteria there in the Fair Work Act. The Fair Work Act has grown by around 50% in that period. So that's a huge burden.
Okay, well, you can pick up on any of those points, Michele, but I suppose my question, to reverse it from Andrew, is what do you say the consequences would be if either of those two I highlighted, definition of casual work and multi-employer bargaining, were reversed? What do you say the effect of that would be?
Well, thanks, Greg. The first thing I want to say to Andrew is let's just be clear here. Andrew represents, as he said, many organisations and businesses, but I notice a bit of a trend that what happens when employer organisations talk about what needs to be done, and they talk about red tape and they talk about over-regulation, they always use small business as a shield. They never talk about their big business members who are actually on the phone and in their ear constantly about why big business needs to see these things change. And many of the things that Andrew mentioned, in fact, small business is exempt from. So in the Fair Work Act, there's 8 areas that don't apply to small business, including, by and large, multi-employer bargaining. There's also another 10 areas where there's special arrangements in place for small businesses because they have special needs. And that's a fair enough thing. But the other thing I want to say about small businesses and the figures that Andrew's talked about is that the number of businesses employing between 1 and 19 people has actually grown by 108,000 in the last 4 years, or about 13%. Businesses with over 20 have grown even more than that, by 36%, but that's because a lot of small businesses are becoming successful medium-sized businesses. The other thing that's important to know is that with the data available, that over the last 5 years, small businesses were posting profit margins of 18.8% when all businesses overall had profit margins of 13.8%. So this is just some examples of what I think is some cherry picking of figures here. And the last thing I want to say is that 63.4% of small businesses employ no one. It's self-employment. So the majority of small businesses in this country, what is in employment law and industrial relations doesn't apply to them because they don't have employees.
Okay. So, Andrew, Michelle's taking us to the question of profitability, and she's got some data at her fingertips there. It actually paints a fairly rosy picture compared to more recent data about imbalances between public sector headcount, employee growth, and what's happening in the private sector. To pick up on Michelle's point, why isn't profitability being converted into headcount?
Well, I wish it was. I wish it was so. I think the sad news, Greg, is that the situation is not quite as Michelle represents it, and particularly for small businesses. So if you look at now the level of insolvencies that's taking place in the country, I think we've had 14,000 insolvencies in the past 12 months. It's been trending up. It's definitely going in the wrong direction. I mean, I think here, one of the things to note is, we have 2.5 million small businesses in Australia. Many of them are at a level below 15 employees, but there are around 50,000 plus small businesses who, if you increased the threshold that we've talked about, and Michelle mentioned there are some exemptions there in the Fair Work Act currently, for less than 15 employees. We want to take that number up. And what would that mean? An extra 50,000 plus businesses would have access to some of those protections, more than 500,000 employees within those businesses, possibly quite a bit more. So we want to see that benefit extended more widely. We want to protect more people who are running small businesses. They are facing challenges at the moment. They are not making good profits. If you look at the figures in the national accounts, then what you will see that is in fact net of mining across the rest of the economy, and particularly for small and medium-sized businesses, they are struggling. They've been struggling with higher costs. They have met higher wages. Their profitability has been going backwards. And there are serious consequences coming from that, and I'm sure we'll address those in a moment.
Well, can I just pick up on that issue about who'd be affected if you lifted that claim that ACCI have, where they want the lifting of small business definition to be 25 instead of 15? That would mean 1 million more workers in this country would be worse off. That's 1 million people who today are only just, as we heard from both of us, are only just starting to see improvements in their wages, who still need time to recover. 1 million more workers with less rights, less job security, no access to important rights that they currently have. So to suggest that the answer to what we face in Australia today is to rip away rights for 1 million workers, when you hear employer groups use the word cutting red tape, you can just replace that with cutting workers' wages and rights.
All right, there might be further questions. There might be further questions on red tape. I want to signpost that I will turn to our colleagues here in the room very shortly to ask their questions, but as we approach almost a midway point in this debate, I think you both might have in mind a question to put to one another. Let's insert that here, and once again, Michelle, you can fire away to Andrew McKellar.
Andrew, I do have a question for you. So what has Peter Dutton's coalition promised your members that they will deliver if they're elected?
Well, thank you for your question, Michelle, and that's easy. We have not asked them for anything specific, and they have not promised us. So I go back to the point that I made at the start. We are apolitical. We are non-partisan. We are coming to this election wanting to see a coherent, a very detailed, a systematic debate on the policies that should be adopted for this nation in the next term of government, whoever forms that government. And our position is that that should be based around a comprehensive strategy for productivity. What it's got to do is it's got to focus on how do we attract stronger business investment, ensure that we are creating the opportunity for greater capital productivity. How do we drive labour productivity? How do we boost skills? How do we make our workplaces more effective for the future? How do we find more time for business? The cutting the red tape piece. This is a fundamental challenge.
All right.
And I think then additionally, you've got to look at also How do we take up the new technologies that are coming forward? Digital technologies, AI. Let's not be scared of these opportunities. Let's use them as an opportunity for the future. So that's the agenda that we're putting forward, Greg.
All right.
We want to see ambition from the major parties. We want to see an agenda that goes to the issue of productivity. We want to be optimistic. We want to see something that I think really answers the needs of workers, of businesses, of small businesses, and benefits the general community.
All right, and no doubt there's a burning question you've always wanted to ask the ACTU President.
Well, I think let's keep the topic going. I mean, look, we're talking about an agenda for productivity. I said before, if you don't have a plan for productivity, Michelle, then you don't have a plan for real wages. So I do want to know, what is the ACTU's plan for productivity? Do you have a broader agenda? How do you strengthen business investment? How do you make our workplaces?
Isn't that 4 questions?
Come
on, Drew.
Well, but you have to have a policy for it. So
we trust Michelle.
How do you make our workplaces more productive? How do you take the pressure of red tape off small business and accelerate the uptake of those critical technologies?
All right, away you go, Michelle.
Thanks, Greg. And Andrew, I want to talk about productivity because I think it's really important. What we know is that the things that Andrew's been talking about productivity, he's been talking about that if productivity rises, then this will be something that will then lead to wage increases. Well, what we know is that that's not the case. Wages have lagged behind productivity growth for the best part of 12 years in this country. And where was ACCI when productivity growth was higher than wages growth? Where was ACCI calling for workers to see more of their share of that? Deathly silence. No calls from ACCI or other employer groups to say, well, this is bad, we better give some of this productivity growth to workers. No, very happy to stay silent when that was purely going into the coffers of business and profits and not being shared with working people. So we support improvements in productivity, but the things that matter are some of the things that actually Andrew's opposed to or doesn't like to talk about. In fact, CEDA, the Committee for Economic Development, concluded in their most recent report about this that half of the productivity gap in Australia and the US lies in our weaker managerial capacity. So I think that's something that organisation that represents employers should be looking at. The other thing that Andrew and his organisation are opposed to is non-compete clauses. And if people don't know what that is, that's a clause that if you're a worker, you might be a hairdresser, you stop working in this business, you want to work in the other one, you've got a contract that they made you sign when you got the first job to say that you can't go and get a job in that industry or sector again. These are massive productivity and wage killers across the economy. They are outlawed in many other countries, and what the Productivity Commission, usually no friend of mine, has said about this, that is if we got rid of these non-compete clauses, then it would increase wages for workers of 2.4% in those industries that use them, but it would add nearly $5.4 billion in improved labour productivity to our GDP. Yeah. But Andrew's organisation is opposed to getting rid of non-compete clauses. So let's see more investment in skills and training, more capital investment from business, both of which have been woeful, and let's get rid of these non-compete clauses.
All right, thanks for highlighting that too, Michelle, because that is something that the government has spoken about addressing, but we haven't actually got the final deal on that. Maybe that will come in the campaign. Let's turn now to questions from our journalist colleagues here at the National Press Club. First up today, Tom Connell of Sky News, and Tom's also our president here at the National Press Club.
Thanks, Greg. Tom Connell from Sky News. Now, I was struggling to get my daughter up on Monday. She's 5 going on 13. She said, well, I always have to get up on Mondays. And I said, yes. And then I paused and I thought, the 4-day working week. People are talking about it. You've spoken about it, Michelle. Medibank's in a trial. Unilever's rolled it out. I'm interested, though, because Unilever, for example, hasn't given it to factory workers. Now, the unions always spoke about rights for everyone, and you've obviously represented blue-collar workers and front-facing industries like cafe workers. They can't just have fewer meetings in a cafe and cram 5 days into 4. So Is there going to be a situation in Australia where the 4-day working week happens for white-collar workers and not others? And will that be hard for you to justify? And if big business does take this up, and there's hope for my daughter yet, Andrew, will small business have to follow, do you think? Will they have no choice? You first.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. The 4-day week is something that's been trialled in different sectors and industries and businesses here in Australia and around the world. And there's been some really positive signs, in fact, about where it's worked and where it's been done properly in consultation with workers and their unions, and there's been a system designed wherein the employers and the workers together say, let's have a go at this. There's been really positive impacts. But you're right in saying one size doesn't fit all. It's not something you can just pick up and say, well, this works in this industry and in exactly the same way in this sector or industry. So what I'd say about it is that it's important that we keep changing, that we realise that the modern world is different, but we need to do that in a way where we think carefully about the consequences. Now, of course, in a factory environment, you can have some workers working 4 days and other workers working another 4 days. Like, it doesn't have to be that it's a reduced period of time, and similarly with a cafe. But I don't think, and it's not our view, that this should be a blanket approach. We need to keep doing those really important tests of this, see what we learn from it, and then carefully adjust it by industry.
Well, Tom, you take me back for a moment to my time as a student in the ANU Faculty of Economics, and I noticed after a little while that strangely there were no lectures on Monday and there were no tutorials on Friday, and I think so pretty clearly those canny academics had worked things out pretty well. But no, look, I think to give you a serious answer here, you mentioned a number of individual companies and trialling different models, and I think that's an important point to start with. So in terms of the working models, what are the standard working hours, what delivers the best outcome for those individual enterprises, that should be with the enterprise. And I don't think we don't seek to tell individual businesses what they should do to run their own business. So I think that's an important starting point. The issue here, and the issue we're seeing is with various unions bringing forward proposals, whether it be for an additional week of annual leave or whether it be a 4-day working week or something else, are these going to be parts of the national employment standards? Are they going to be, as Michele says, one size fits all? And we would say certainly they should not. If you've got the capacity to ensure that you can meet your business objectives, if you can get the productivity, then by all means negotiate an outcome that rewards your employees and gives them the working conditions that they want. That's the fundamental approach that we support. But that's not something that should be imposed right across the board universally. We're not in the position where we can agree to a national employment standard for 5 days annual leave a year or to 4-day working weeks. When you think about that, the impact that would have in terms of the cost, the effectiveness for small and medium-sized businesses across Australia, it's completely unrealistic.
All right, more questions from our working press here at the club. Jack Quayle from The Australian.
Thanks, Greg. A question for Ms O'Neill. In the past few weeks, the ACT has rightly taken on everyone from Sanjeev Gupta to Macca's franchises for their poor treatment of vulnerable workers. But Australian Super, where you sit as a board member, is being sued by ASIC for significant delays in processing almost 7,000 death benefit claims. To that end, what are you doing in your capacity as the director to make sure Australian Super is accountable, and can you assure members that the board will be similarly accountable by financial penalties, undertakings or cultural change?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. The first thing I'd say is that having a superannuation system which has people on the board that understand what's happening for workers and ordinary members, as well as having employers on the board who understand about businesses, is really important. And it is unacceptable that workers who are members of Australian Super had to wait as long as they did in some cases to receive their death benefits. But we also know that this has changed. It was Australian Super through the board and its management that reported this. We found this, we said this is not okay, we voluntarily reported it and said, and these are the things we're doing to fix it. And what Australian Super has done, and this is something that I think is really important, is that it realised that one of the problems was that this work had been outsourced to another business. So it was another business, a contractor of Australian Super, where this happened. So they've now brought it in-house. There's a bereavement centre directly employed within Australian Super, people trained to understand what it's like when people are grieving, and they might not have all the paperwork or know all the answers. And of course we've got to understand that, because you have to respond to people at their hardest time with empathy and understanding and help them through it. So I think that it's clear that there's been important lessons learned and changes made.
Thank you.
Andrew, any observations
a very
on that?
quick comment on that. Look, I think, and Michelle made some important comments there. Look, I think it raises a broader question, and we've seen not just the circumstances with Australian Super, we've seen other industry super funds, CBUS, had a number of issues. There are, I think, some fundamental governance issues in superannuation and in industry superannuation that need to be looked at and looked at carefully. We've seen APRA recently, foreshadowing some potential changes in terms of, director arrangements, and obviously those need to be looked at carefully. We do think that there are issues in terms of governance standards within superannuation, as much as anything, that I think do need to be on the table and do need to be looked at. We need to protect members' money. We need to ensure that it's used for the purposes that it's intended, that it's not siphoned off to other purposes, or it's not delayed in going to the intended beneficiary. So I think it is a point where further work needs to be done.
All right, let's move on. Jacob Steinman from AAP.
Thanks, Greg, and Jacob Steinman from AAP. Michelle, I'll start with you again. I'm going to try and quote you loosely here, so apologies if I get you wrong, but essentially the proposals to cut red tape, you're saying, amount to a reduction in workers' rights. What about cutting green tape? The Coalition today has proposed to fast-track the approvals for the North West Shelf gas extension, if elected, and to speed environmental approval process more broadly. That would result in more economic activity and more union jobs. Do you support that?
What we support is a transition to renewable energy that happens in a way that's both fast and fair. We've got an enormous challenge facing us in this country, and it's really important that we don't waste the opportunity to what could be the creation of new industries, new jobs, good, safe, secure, well-paid jobs, but we need to make sure that we don't forget the people who've kept the lights on in this country for generations, and that we work in those communities so that there's a bridge, so that people who have worked in fossil fuel intensive industries, we know coal-fired power stations have been closing around the country, that there's new jobs created that they don't have to wait for. You know, this idea that sometime in the future, like Peter Dutton's nuclear idea, sometimes, 15, 20 years in the future, there might be some jobs. These workers need good quality jobs now. They need investment now, which is why we've been strongly supportive of the Future Made in Australia policies, the investment in green metals, the support for having investment that is going to deliver good quality jobs in those communities, but also support local businesses in them as well. So we see that there is a lot to be done, but the other thing I would say is we also know that one of the key issues at the moment is that the majority of Australians' gas is exported at a huge profit to large gas companies without returns to the Australian community for the people whose resources it is. We don't want to make those mistakes as we transition. We want to make sure that Australian workers, their families, their communities, that they benefit from what is big government investment in this. We want to see big government investment, but not free handouts to big business. Let's make sure that we see those jobs created, they're good quality jobs, that they deliver to working people. And that needs to be happening now. We can't wait. This is a sort of fantasy that somehow there's a lot more time for this to happen. Australia has such riches in terms of our renewable resources. We could be not only creating jobs here in terms of what we're doing in Australia, but exporting this. So creating more benefit for all Australians by actually making the products that we value add here in Australia with our resources instead of what we've done in the past. So I don't want to turn the clock back. I want us to absolutely dial up what we need to make sure the transition is fair.
A comment on that. So look, thanks for the question. Look, I think there are big issues here. The level of green tape that's impacting business, particularly for our resources sector, is a major issue. A couple of years ago, our West Australian Chamber did a major piece of work on the green web, of the compliance burden that was facing, I think, tens of billions of dollars worth of project investment in Western Australia and the impact that could have. We have seen things with the expansion of Northwest Shelf, for example, the length of time it's taken to get approval for that. We still don't have it at a federal level. It's been held off, probably held off until after the election, curiously enough. This is a major project, one of our major export projects in Australia. Investment being held up for no good reason. This is not as if it's a greenfield site. This is not a new sod turning. This is an established project that's been running for many years. There is no reason not to get that happening as quickly as possible. We've seen other examples in terms of significant resource projects. The whole nature positive debate, we have no guarantee that after the election that flawed legislation won't be attempted to be brought back. Who knows what the shape of the Senate will be after the election? Who knows what the commitments that will have to be given to minor parties, potentially to the Greens, in order to secure an outcome on the other side of the election. I think that's a major uncertainty. It will have a chilling effect on investment in this country, and I think that's really something that we can't afford to have.
All right, we have a couple more questions coming up from our colleagues. I think time might permit me to indulge in another one before we go to my colleague Michael. It surrounds red tape, and it's what the Americans call DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion. We're told via the global corporations, which would include McDonald's for one, Google and Meta, that it might creep into Australian corporate culture, the reversal of DEI initiatives. Andrew McKellar, do you see that as a likelihood in the Australian context? And if it did happen, would that be an adverse corporate development?
Well, I think what you're describing in the American context is, I would see it as being something that's particular to America. I don't think it's something that necessarily is applicable to the same extent in Australia, because frankly, we haven't seen those sorts of arrangements in anywhere near the same level. I think there are important issues in terms of diversity, in terms of opportunity, flexibility within our workforce. And most Australian companies are perfectly capable of determining how they address those issues internally. I think we've got to be very careful about getting into a regime where you are regulating for particular outcomes, setting particular thresholds or targets or quotas. I think that would be an adverse thing, and I think that would bring a counter-reaction, and potentially that's some of what we're seeing in the United States. But sure. I don't think this is something that should be exported to Australia. I don't think we need that.
And Michele, would this be something that the union movement would be wanting to build defences around in case that trend did come in via some of those companies initially that I mentioned?
Well, I would hope, Greg, that we don't see America as the sort of country we want Australia to be. We don't want an American healthcare system. We don't want American wages for workers. And we definitely don't want to see some of the worst of Donald Trump's policies imported into this country. And we've already seen, in fact, with Peter Dutton's one of his announcements in the last few weeks about saying that they were going to force public sector workers to work 5 days a week from the office as a direct pickup, a direct copy of one of the things Donald Trump announced on his first day. And what that would mean, of course, is that for not all jobs, in fact, the majority of jobs can't be done at home. But for workers whose work can be done at home, it has made a significant difference in terms of women's workforce participation, which is a productivity issue, by the way, improving productivity, for them to be able to do more of work from home as well as in the office and balance care and life responsibilities. Not that it should be women's responsibility to do all the caring, but I'm talking about the reality of people's family and life arrangements today. And Andrew, look, I've sat on a lot of organisations, committees, boards, management committees, and I know the difference it makes when you have more equal representation. I know the difference it makes in terms of the quality of the debate and the decision making and how people treat each other. And when I think about things like access for people with disability to be able to get into the workforce, the people living with a disability that I've met who've told me what a difference it makes when there's been policies and programs in place that give them a chance. Like people who want to work, who've wanted to work all their life and have been locked out of it. So I would hope that we're proud of the measures that we put in place in this country to make sure that our workplaces reflect who we are and every part of who lives here and who wants to work.
All right, I might have detected a little bit of common ground there between the two of you on that one. Michael de Percy from Spectator Australia, the mic's yours.
Thanks, Greg. Michael de Percy, Spectator Australia. It's interesting you said common ground. During the 80s, business and the unions did find common ground and they were able to support the common good in terms of supporting the reforms of the Hawke government in particular. Now, our politics is much more polarised and business and the unions are reflecting that polarisation. Now, when it comes to workers, I don't know a single worker, union or non-union worker, who's not working their butts off right now. And I just find this debate about IR and productivity a real problem when infrastructure, if we look at multi-factor productivity, would actually benefit both union and businesses, and we're just not focused on that. Now, is this a reflection of our political leadership, or is this something that business and the unions could actually focus on to find common ground so that the workers aren't always responsible for productivity?
I'm happy to,
Andrew, take it away.
Happy to kick the ball off here. So, I mean, you've raised an interesting question, and I think it goes to the heart of our industrial relations system to an extent, to the degree in which we work. Do we have a truly tripartite model in this country or not? And just to give you, I guess, an interesting experience, last year I was in Singapore. And I went to, at an ILO meeting, went to a meeting. We had a briefing from employer representatives, government representatives, the National Trade Union Congress, and one of the things that the trade union representative put up was some details around the progressive wage model in Singapore. And what they said there is this is a model that they developed for Singapore back in 2012. The goal was to achieve sustainable wage increases through better skills and higher productivity. I thought, gee, wow, that's a union leader talking about productivity. I should listen more. 4 elements that they had in that strategy. The first was skills upgrading. The second was productivity improvement. The third was career enhancement. And the fourth was salary progression. So I mean, we can learn something potentially. I do think we have a different system. One of the disadvantages we have in this country is, as we've seen in the past couple of years, when we start talking about tripartite engagement in Australia, unfortunately, it seems to degenerate into a situation where you've got government and unions working together to impose an agenda, as we have seen, with the successive tranches of industrial relations upon business. That's not true tripartism. I think we do have to think about whether or not it can work in the Australian context.
Michele?
Well, I do also think it's important that we find areas that we can work together on, and the issue of skills and training is a critical one. Like, we know that so much of what needs to happen to improve workers' lives, but also businesses, and improve productivity is lift the skills and capacity of workers and them having the opportunity to participate in training. But as I said earlier, a significant underinvestment in research as well as skills and training and development by Australian employers. So I want to see that improved, and we will work with Andrew, all these organisations, to make sure that that happens in a way that's good for workers as well as business, because the world is changing so rapidly. You think of this, AI and the important shifts that is having on the workforce, and in terms of workers' skills, this is something that workers need to be part of this change, shaping it to make sure it happens in a fair way, in a way that makes a difference, so that it's not just something happening to them, but something that they can actually make sure happens in a way that will lead to their skills improving, their jobs being more secure, them having more opportunities in life. So it can't be a one-way street. This is part of the problem when we hear this discussion about red tape or about flexibility. I mean, Andrew likes to talk about flexibility, but he talks about employer flexibility. He's actually opposed to one of the elements of flexibility that has come in under this government that again has made a real difference in terms of participation at work, which is flexible rights to work. So that if you need a more flexible arrangement and you need to work different days or have some change in your roster, there's now an obligation on an employer to respond to that request. Like, who would think we needed to put that into law? But that was what was happening. They were just being ignored. And now that that's happening, more people are able to manage their responsibilities to care as well as work, lifting participation and improving productivity. So we want to work tripartite. But I will remind Andrew that under the 9 years of the coalition government, every single, except for one that they have to do because of the ILO, every single body that included government requirements to, in the past, have both union, worker representatives and employers on it, we suddenly stopped being invited. Workers weren't at the table. Workers weren't consulted. We weren't there. So yeah, I'm really happy to see that we're now talking to both workers and their representatives when we're making changes that affect working people. And I'm happy to have Andrew as part of that. Doesn't mean we're going to agree, but the more we talk, the better.
All right.
Thank you.
Let's get our next question from Melissa Code of The Mandarin.
Thanks both. Melissa Code from The Mandarin. In light of your debate today and with next week's budget and the very near horizon election, I'd like to ask you to respond to this statement from former Treasury head Ken Henry. Policymakers' larceny is now quite apparent because of decisions we've been making about the rate of accumulation and sectoral allocation of physical capital. Young Australian workers find themselves in an economy that is no longer capable of generating rates of productivity growth, supportive of durable increases in real wages, with financial capital increasingly concentrated in the hands of those who no longer have to work for a living and some who never did. He then goes on to say that the functioning of capitalism and democracy is a crisis affecting the Western world, Australia included. Can you please respond to that statement?
Michele?
Look, I think, just starting at the end there, Melissa, I think the crisis in democracy around the world is something that is a real concern. Concern because of what it means for our future. And we're a proud democratic country, but if you look around the world, democracy is under attack. So it should be something that we defend both here and around the world. And for working people, it's really important, because if you look at the places where democracy has been attacked or undermined, then they absolutely match up with places where workers are more grossly exploited, where they're persecuted for organising themselves into unions, where they don't have any access to real wage increases or fair treatment at work. So on that, I think he's right. I also think there is a serious issue about issues to do with generational inequity. And it is a challenge. We need to think about this. We need to make sure that we address this challenge as a country. We know that for young workers, they're often more vulnerable. They're more likely to be in casual and insecure work, which is why we're worried about this change to the casuals that Andrew and Peter Dutton want to bring in. Because already young people face the insecurity, and we've finally seen a system that says, you know, some people want to work casuals and we support that. They shouldn't be stopped. But if your job actually becomes regular and ongoing, The policy that Andrew and Peter Dutton want to have built in is that that doesn't matter. Whatever the boss calls you, you will be treated like that for as long as they employ you, which means you've got no job security. They can sack you at a whim. And of course, that adds to generational inequality. So yes, I agree. We need to look at what is it that's making it harder for younger people. We need to address it and address it seriously, and we would welcome that discussion.
Andrew, Melissa's question really is in essence about intergenerational equity, isn't it? What policy response would you propose?
Well, I think Ken Henry's raised some important questions there, and I think he brings a knowledgeable and valuable perspective to the discussion and the debate. One of the things we would say is if we want to be able to deliver on those aspirations, on those values, then what we need to do is we need to ensure that there is a sustainable future for the generations coming forward. We can't spend that inheritance now. And the risk is that we are getting into that position. Now, one of the other things that Ken Henry contributed to, of course, he was someone who put forward a major tax reform plan a little over a decade ago. Of course, it was never acted upon, and as I mentioned in my opening comments, we're now a quarter of a century since any government has successfully achieved that. We are getting into a period, I think we've seen a period, where a lot of what government does is incredibly transactional. They're not investing for the long term. They're not looking at taking the hard decisions, at doing things that are ambitious, that spend political capital, but in the end will deliver results for future generations. And I think we see that challenge. Next week we have the federal budget. We're in an environment at the moment where government expenditure is pushing towards 27% of GDP. The only way that we can sustain that will be if tax revenues come up to meet it. We'll have record levels of taxation in this country. That is unsustainable. Next week what we have to see is government taking the first step to put a cap on the levels of government expenditure to get us back into a situation where we can have a sustainable budget position, a sustainable agenda for government, and hopefully reopen the door to the missing piece of the Ken Henry agenda, and that is an agenda for tax reform, meaningful tax reform that will deliver better intergenerational equity in the years ahead. If we don't do that, then I think we are really missing an opportunity. We have to start that next week, and the next government has to have an agenda to deliver upon that. Whatever else is said in the next couple of weeks. We don't want to see a TikTok election. What we're coming forward is with an ambitious agenda where we're saying, here are some substantive issues that the next government has got to grapple with.
Yeah. All right, we are entering the final phase of our session here, and you're both entitled to make a brief or relatively brief wrap-up statement. I was going to say, if I could shape it a little, you kind of touched on it there, Andrew. One idea that you would really insist on beyond the election from the next government, whether you can highlight one of those each in your closing remarks. Michele. Oh, actually, no, we're reversing the batting order, aren't we? That's sure. Right. By agreement, it is Andrew going first.
No, look, thanks, Greg. And I did have some pre-prepared closing remarks, but I think in light of the discussion, I might put those to one side and go to a slightly different issue because it's not something that we've touched on to date in any great detail, and that is we have seen as of last weekend, and we've seen over the past year, I think, significant revelations about the conduct in a major union in Australia, the CFMEU. And I think that takes us back to the issue of integrity and respect for the rule of law. So I would highlight that as something that we think has really got to be grappled with. It's very clear from the revelations that came out in media last week that we haven't seen enough progress to address those fundamental issues in the 6 months or so since some of those initial reports emerged. We need to have a very clear plan by governments, by enforcement agencies, by business, by unions, as to how we're going to address these issues, how we're going to restore public confidence, and we're not seeing that at the moment. So from a business point of view, we supported putting the CFMEU Construction and General Division into administration, but we've that we're seeing that is not delivering the results that were expected. Beyond that, we do have to have an independent judicial inquiry. It's got to have investigative powers. It's got to be able to call witnesses. It's got to be able to make recommendations on prosecutions that should be launched. We need a strong and effective regulator. We don't have that at the moment. We abolished the ABCC. That was a terrible mistake. And we're seeing that the Fair Work Ombudsman simply does not have the power, does not have the resources, doesn't have the track record to address that. So we need to bring back a strong, well-resourced regulator. We need to address the question of fit and proper person. You know, there was video on the weekend of a health and safety representative, a union delegate, violently assaulting another person, a woman in a corridor. That person is a delegate who has the right to access work sites. That's unacceptable. You know, we need to lift the standard. We need to ensure that can't happen. And the final point, we do need to keep deregistration of the CFMEU Construction and General Division on the table. If all else fails, that sanction should still be there.
All right, a list of agenda items there from Andrew surrounding the construction sector. Michelle, your ideas?
Well, the first thing I'd say, Greg, is that I was completely sickened by the footage that some of you will have seen and that Andrew refers to. We've been very clear. There is absolutely no place for violence and harassment against women or anyone in our industries, in our unions, in our workplaces or in our homes. And I don't understand why that man isn't locked up. But I also know that what's been proposed by Andrew and by Peter Dutton, again, there's some commonality here, is going to make it worse. Because if you deregister a union, then you actually remove it out of scrutiny. You remove what is now a really important job that's being done by the administrators, incredibly hard work being done by those administrators and by, in fact, many, many good, hard-working people who are members of that union and in that industry who are appalled and who are trying to make sure that it is cleaned up. And you know what is happening in that industry? Something that, again, Andrew doesn't talk about. It's the infiltration of organised crime and outlawed motorcycle gangs into the industry as a whole. And these are criminal matters. This is organised crime, which it's not the first industry that they target. So they'll target an industry where they know they can make money. And then they behave in the sort of atrocious ways we've seen. And the people who really suffer from that are the working people in the construction industry who come to work and do a really hard, dangerous, important job every day. So I want to hear Andrew talk about what's going to be done to make sure that serious criminal matters are dealt with, that we see the resources that are necessary. We've got strong laws now. We need to make sure the resources are devoted to this, to have people held to account when they act in a criminal way. And a lot of what we just saw there was criminal activity in an industry. I'm not saying there's not issues. The administrator is doing an important, hard job trying to clean up the union, and they should be given the opportunity to do so. But Andrew, I also want to end with something that is important to say. For workers, the choice in this election is really stark. And we've heard from today Andrew's wish list of what he would like a new government to do. And that worries us because we actually know our history. And we know our history about employer wish lists and what coalitions governments do if they get into power. And it was one of Andrew's predecessors at ACCI who spelled out really clearly what business expected from John Howard. And every one of those wishes was granted in work choices, every one. So we are worried that there is an understanding that we'll see workers' wages go backwards and workers' rights stripped from them if Peter Dutton was elected into power. But I want to end on something positive because I do appreciate Andrew's efforts there as well. And instead of wage-cutting claims, employer organisations could work with us to focus on the issues that put workers and businesses at risk. And there's two of them. One is the threat of Donald Trump to our economy. What we could do together to support local jobs and companies and make sure we're in the very best position to respond to that threat. And the second one I've touched on, but I'm going to end on it, the threat of climate change and the urgent need for an effective and fair transition to renewable energy, and one that gives us the opportunity to create secure, well-paid jobs in the communities that need them and support the businesses that are making that change.
All right,
Thanks.
a few ideas to get on with there, and it's not without precedent that your organisations might cooperate from time to time. I think we saw it in the pandemic, and we saw it, I think, after the Jobs and Skills Summit, up to a point anyway at the start of this this current parliament. We'll farewell our audience and everyone in just a moment with some final observations from me, but how about a handshake before we say goodbye to our audience today? So yes, plenty of food for thought thrown up in this discussion today between Michele O'Neill and Andrew McKellar. The National Press Club is working on a series of debates before and during the election campaign proper. We'll keep working on Murray Watt and Michaelia Cash, the relevant ministers and shadows in the industrial relations portfolio. I promise there will be others too. But for now, from the National Press Club, thanks for joining us and goodbye.